What's cracking, guys? Omar Isov here. I am back with another video featuring Eric Helms, someone I highly respect, a very knowledgeable person. The first video we talked about nutrition. Is it necessary to be in a caloric surplus in order to build muscle? The idea behind this series is to educate you guys. That's the whole point behind this channel. If you can walk away with something that could better help you with your lifting, then we've done a damn good job. And with this video today, Eric Helms is going to talk about training to failure. Should you train to failure? A very common question, a common issue, but he's going to put a unique spin on it, and he's going to give a thorough perspective on the subject. So if you like these videos, guys, make sure to like these videos and also leave a comment below what you want to see next. What we did with the first video, we took a tally and guys wanted, us to discuss training to failure. So that is this topic. Post below what you want to see next. Without further ado, I'm going to let Eric do the talking.
Hey everybody, Eric Helms here from 3D Muscle Journey. I'm back. Omar, thanks for having me. And we're continuing our series with the second installment of me. And I'm here to talk about, once again, changing not just what you think, but how you think, and using practical examples in nutrition and training to make you a better bro or sis in the iron game, and helping you understand the fundamentals of what you're doing so you can make better, more informed decisions in your training to get better progress. So today, the example we're going to be talking about is training to failure. So that's taking a set all the way to the point where you cannot do any more reps or even failing mid-rep versus not. And the arguments around doing so or not doing so, when it's appropriate, and why there is even controversy in the first place. So, first off, typically what you'll see on the interwebs when people talk about this is you'll have two groups. One group who comes from the position of you should always train to failure because you recruit all the motor units, you train all the fibers, and within that set, the only way to get the maximal training stimulus within that set is to take it all the way to failure, and that's the best way to train because of that. The other side of it, they say you should never train to failure because it will hurt subsequent performance, it induces a state of overtraining, etc., 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 right? And typically, whenever you're in a black and white argument and it's arguing two extremes, both sides end up being partially right and partially wrong, and this is no exception. So let's talk about why and kind of dig into it. So the first thing to remember is that you don't want to get too close with your microscope when you're analyzing information in exercise science or nutrition, or you tend to lose the big picture. Okay? So while it is true that if you take a set all the way to failure, you're getting the maximum stimulus from that set. If you think about it, if you're taking your 5-rep max, obviously you get a better growth response or better stimulus from doing all 5 reps versus just one. It's 5 times the volume, right? It's 5 more attempts to practice that lift. However, you have to consider, okay, if I take set 1 to failure, how does that affect set 2? And if I take set 2 to failure, how does that affect set 3? And if I take set 3 to failure, how does that affect set 4, 5, etc. And then my next exercise, and then my next day, then my next week, my microcycle, mesocycle, macrocycle, right? So you have to consider not only is what you're doing in that moment the best, but how does that impact your overall training career, okay? So, so the argument that if you take a set all the way to failure, you get the maximal stimulus, you're getting maximum fiber recruitment, that is true, but it's also, you also have to realize that it's not the only way to effectively recruit and train fibers. For example, if you're training right around 80 to 85% of your 1RM, pretty much you're getting maximum motor unit recruitment already. The way we produce more force above loads over 80 to 85% of 1RM is by increasing what's called rate coding. So it's not just how many motor units are firing, but the rate at which they're sending twitch signals. Okay. Additionally, if you think about what would happen if you had a 1RM squat on your back and all of a sudden just disappeared, you'd leap into the air, right? That's because if the load wasn't there, you're pushing as hard as you can, which means you produce a lot of velocity with a lighter load, right? So if you are putting maximum concentric effort into a weight, you're also going to get a higher amount of motor unit recruitment. And it can't be too light. You can't train with just a bar and get full motor unit recruitment. But if you're training with a moderately heavy load, if you're pushing as hard as you can or pulling as hard as you can on the concentric, you're also going to get a higher level of motor unit recruitment. Additionally, if you're performing multiple sets as metabolic fatigue mounts, you're going to have a lower threshold to recruit those all the motor units, the higher threshold motor units that are associated with your big fast twitch muscles. there's a lower threshold to recruit them. They'll get recruited earlier because other fibers are fatigued. So it's kind of the same concept as training to failure, but looking at the bigger picture of doing multiple sets. So you don't have to train to failure to train those fibers. It is true that you will get the maximum training effect from taking a single set to failure. But that doesn't mean that it's the only way to effectively train multiple, all the motor units involved in a muscle. So now that we've kind of established some of the exercise physiology, let's talk about some of the data that's actually out there. Recent meta-analysis that came out by Davies. This meta-analysis, and meta-analysis is basically when you take a whole bunch of studies and you collate the information together so you can make some informed decisions based on a larger data pool. This meta-analysis found that when you take a volume-equated training program where you don't go to failure versus a volume-equated training program where you do go to failure, that going to failure is better. Some of you are going, hold on, if it's that clear, then why don't we just always go to failure? Well, here's the thing. Volume-equated means that you're stopping the number of sets and reps and the amount of load they can use at a certain point. Volume is controlled, right? So the question is, in the real world, would the group that's not going to failure, is not incurring as much fatigue, would they have stopped there normally? Or would they be following a program that allows them to do more volume? It's tough to say. It's a hard thing to study. In this meta-analysis, they also found that when volume wasn't controlled, there wasn't an advantage to training to failure. So that advantage disappeared once volume was not controlled. So what that might tell you is that training to failure is a trade-off. It drops your ability to do volume to a degree, but it increases the effectiveness of that individual set. And some other studies suggest that there's a higher stress response in the body, like some things like cortisol response or testosterone-cortisol ratio are less favorable in a position, or they indicate more fatigue with regular failure training. Okay, so it's definitely a trade-off. And if you think about it, just think about a real practical example. Let's say you go to the gym. Let's say you can do 225 on bench for 10 reps. Okay, and one gentleman decides to go in there and do 10 reps on his first set. Well, because he went to failure, he's probably only going to get like 7 on his next set. And if he takes that one all the way to failure, grinds out those 7, he might only get 5. So he's got a total of 22 reps on those 3 sets. Another guy comes in and goes, you know what, I'm going to do 3 by 8 and just manage my fatigue a little better. And he only gets near failure on his very last set. He gets 24 reps. So he gets about 10% more reps than the other guy with the same load. And it's hard to argue that even though that guy took every set to failure, that he's going to get a better training stimulus because the other guy actually got more volume. So it's all about priorities. Training to failure does increase recruitment and all the things I already talked about. But in the end, progressive overload, including progressively overloading volume over time and accomplishing a higher level of work, is what's going to be related to hypertrophy and strength more than just whether you took one set to failure. So that's one simple practical example of where training to failure can be harmful. But it's not always necessarily going to be harmful. You really want to think about how do you use training to failure to your advantage, right? So, if we know it's effective for recruiting muscles, and we know that can also create higher levels of fatigue, that means we want to limit training to failure to things that are going to have a lower risk of being harmful to us. So, for example, if you're doing compound, complex, heavy barbell movements like a squat, a bench, a deadlift, or for the Olympic lifters out there, a snatch or clean and jerk, hopefully not doing snatches to failure. Anyway, so squats, bench, deadlift, heavy barbell rows, things like that, you probably don't want to take those all the way to failure, right? That's where you're going to be training a lot of muscle groups at once. You're going to be therefore incurring more fatigue if you go to failure. It's more about accumulating volume, focusing on progressive overload. Instead, the times when you might want to actually go to failure on a compound is when you're maybe doing an AMRAP or a 1RM, so testing your strength to see where your actual limits are, or potentially if it's in progress of you trying to meet a progression target. So for example, if you have a peaking schedule for a powerlifting meet and 3 weeks out you're supposed to do 3 reps 3 by 3 with your old 90% of 1RM, that might be a very tough session. That last set or second to last set, depending on how much strength you gained in that peaking cycle, may take you all the way to failure. But you might do it just to see if you can meet the progression and get the training stimulus that is programmed. So when it has a purpose on the compound lift, failure might be okay. Testing, meeting a progression, assuming the progression is reasonable. And then in other cases, so let's say you're doing your accessory work or your single joint isolation bodybuilding work afterwards, or if you're a bodybuilder, you're doing bench for chest, rows for back, overhead press for shoulders, chins, and then you have maybe curls, pushdowns and lateral raises, potentially on the last set of each one of those, you could use a weight that would take you to failure, or squeeze it an extra few reps to hit failure. Because the fatigue you're going to incur from a bicep curl or a tricep pushdown or a lateral raise is so small that even if you're training upper body like a day, 48 hours later, it's very unlikely that that's going to negatively affect your performance. However, taking overhead press or a bench press or a deadlift or a squat to failure very likely could affect you even 48 hours later. And there's actually data to show that going to failure can negatively affect force production. So it should be targeted. So a good take home is to use failure to advantage, potentially just leave it to single joint or easy movements that don't incur a lot of fatigue on your last set for that body part in the session. And then probably not doing it on compounds except for the purpose of meeting a progression or testing strength. All right. Now let's talk about one of the most useful tools to manage your intensity of effort, how close to failure you're actually getting. Very cool thing, originally developed by Michael Tuchscherer, IPF gold medalist in the 120 kg class, and also a fantastic powerlifting theorist and coach. He developed a Rpe scale, so rating of perceived exertion. This is your subjective rating of how hard a set was, based on repetitions in reserve. So how many reps there are at the end of a set. And this is something that I'm researching for my PhD, along with my good friend and mentor, Dr. Michael Zerdos, who's in the Florida Atlantic University. And we recently published some research specifically on this scale, which you can see right here. Basically, a 10 RPE corresponds to, that is the most you could have done in terms of load and reps. You couldn't have done one more rep. You probably couldn't have even added another kilo and completed the set. 9.5 means, you couldn't have done another rep, but maybe you could have done 1, 2, 3, 4 more kilos, or 2, 3, 5, 6 more pounds at most. And then on downwards from there, it goes by repetitions in reserve. So 9 RPE means you could have done 1 more rep, 8 RPE, 2 more reps, 7 RPE, 3 more reps, and then the 0.5 values just represent a level of confidence or lack of surety. 7.5, I don't know, 2 to 3 more reps, that kind of thing. So typically what I do as a coach when I'm programming, and you can see this in my Muscle and Strength Training Pyramid ebook, is I will set either a first set or last set RPE or an RPE range. So in the ebook, for example, I use an RPE for the first set. So basically the idea is that I set a low enough RPE so that if you have 3, 4, or 5 sets prescribed, if you start with a load that gives you that RPE on set 1, you should still be able to not hit failure and get all the sets afterwards. For example, let's say you do 5x5 with a 7 RPE on your first set. That might rise due to accumulated fatigue set to set all the way to 8.5, 9, maybe 9.5 RPE, depending on your rest periods and how conditioned you are. Likewise, if you have a 8.5 or a 9 RPE to start, you might get very near or hit failure on your last set. Another way to do it is to prescribe a range. So for example, you're trying to keep all your sets within the range of 7 to 9 RPE. Maybe that's in an intensity block on your compounds, and then an 8 to 10 RPE on your isolation movements, so allowing yourself to go to failure on that last set like we talked about earlier. So you can also set a last set RPE. So basically, that's thinking backwards from my first example. You're thinking, okay, what load can I use that I will probably hit near failure on my last set, and that's the heaviest I should go on set 1. And then, of course, using RPEs just allows the lifter, allows you to modulate your loads throughout your sets and series of sets to make sure that you're not going to failure more frequently than you intend and creating unnecessary fatigue. All right, folks, so that is it. We've talked about failure, what it means, the arguments for and against it, and hopefully you understand a little bit about why there is an argument and why both groups who take an extreme position are missing something, and you can use it better in your training. All right, I'll talk to you next time. Thank you very much.
Well guys, that's the video. Thank you so much to Eric for being on once again. I'm glad, honestly, that the first part of the series did so well. It shows that there are a lot of individuals out there that really want to learn. They want to make some damn gains, but they want to understand how to do that. Make sure to follow Eric on all his social media accounts. Like I said, if you do enjoy this series, this style of video, make sure to like the video and post below what you want that next topic to be on, and we will make it happen. That's all the time we have, guys. I'll be seeing everyone, my rascals, in that next video. Peace!